This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
They've said, "Oh, Rabbi Glatstein, I think my father listens to Shiurim." That was, I think, a good indication. Rabbi Glatstein's Shiurim are world-renowned. Many views. He has an incredible wealth of knowledge and information on almost any topic that you could think of. I think I've heard many of the Shiurim myself on topics that I didn't even know that there was what to talk about, but somehow Rabbi Glatstein found what to talk about, and they're always very enjoyable. Rabbi Glatstein is I know Rabbi Glatstein is much older than I am, but I remember Rabbi Glatstein's from Yeshiva. He learned in the Chaim Yeshiva where we were. I still remember Rabbi Glatstein preparing in the Ezras Nashim with the piles and piles of Svarim, preparing for the Shiurim. But it was really it's a tremendous chus and a tremendous cover that we have the opportunity that Rabbi Glatstein is giving from his time, his busy schedule, to share some different chizuk with us, and Bez Hashem, hopefully we'll be able to gain a tremendous amount from it. So thank you very much for coming, Rabbi Glatstein. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for the generous introduction. So you might not know, actually I have a very special connection to this yeshiva. Many years ago, this is going back 25 years, actually I believe it was the first year Rabbi Luban came to Florida. My brother, who was learning by Rabbi Luban in Eretz Yisrael, came to Florida, and there was a short stint, he needed a chavrusa. So I was already a little bit older, and I came down to Miami for a few months, and that's when the yeshiva dinner was. And then Rabbi Chait needed someone to give his shiur. So actually, my first opportunity in Harbatzas HaTorah came right here in this yeshiva. I taught, I think, 11th and 12th grade for a few weeks. And so I feel very connected, and I see a lot of old chaverim. And I want to share with you an idea. Actually, I was going to speak about something else, but I can't refrain from sharing this idea with you. In light of everything that's taking place in the world today, and of course every sensitive Jew, anyone with a heart, is thinking about our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael and what's happening, and where is the destiny of the Jewish people going. And we're very familiar with the concept that as much as HaKadosh Baruch Hu values us, but there's an idea of Yeridas Hadoros, the descent of the generations. In other words, we believe that if you start out at Har Sinai, those who accepted the Torah, they were on a greater level than we are today. I mean, there are many Gemaras in Shas that talk about the idea, Yeridas Hadoros. Im Rishonim Kemalachim, if the earlier generations were like angels, then we're just like humans. And if they were like humans, then we're like animals, the Gemara says. The Gemara says that the fingernails of the earlier generations are greater than the stomachs of the later generation. In other words, that's just a way of saying that they're much greater than us. There are many Gemaras in the Gemara says in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, there was Shechina, Ruach HaKodesh, and already by the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, they didn't have all that good stuff. And yet, if we were to ask ourselves, okay, if that's true, that there's a concept of Yeridas Hadoros, but what does Hashem think of us today? Like, what's our value in Shamayim today? You ever wonder about that? Like, what's my worth? I say a bracha. I do a mitzvah. What is my worth in Shamayim today? I give a shiur on a very interesting topic. It's called Bir Tefillah. Just explaining the various tefillahs. We're up to the bracha of Ahava Rabbah. I like to use a sefer, among others. It's called Iyun Tefillah, of Reb Shimon Schwab. I saw an idea over there. I can't help but share this idea with you. I was blown away by this idea. I don't even think I was fully aware of the concept. You know, we say every morning, Ahava Rabbah Ahavtanu, with Does anybody know what those words mean? Translate the words. Ahava Rabbah. How do you translate the words Ahava Rabbah? Great love. That's how I would translate it. That's how I did translate it. In fact, I think most Sidurim translate it that way. And that's how I understood it my entire life. Says Reb Schwab, that's not what it means. Ahava Rabbah does not mean with a great love. Really? What does the word Rabbah mean? He says it means an increasing love. An ever-increasing love. Says Reb Schwab, the Ribono Shel Olam's love for Klal Yisrael gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Can't believe it, really? How do we know that? What evidence? Says Reb Schwab, very simple. And I'm just telling you, Bachram, I don't know if the prince of the Rabbeim should really listen to this, but I'll tell you something personal. When I was in high school, back in the day, and there was a Gemara test, so of course, we listened to every single shiur very, very carefully. But in case, you missed a thing or two, you needed a little crutch, so there is something called a Cincino Gemara. You know what a Cincino is? It's basically a translation of the Gemara in the Queen's English. Most of the time, the Aramaic was more familiar than the, archaic English on the left-hand side of the page. They had something called the Cincino Gemara. And then I think when I got to 8th grade, they had something called an Art Scroll Gemara. The first Mesivta they came out with was Makos. And I remember saying, I could learn a Mesivta on my own, Makos. And then they came out with Hamafged. And then in a couple years, they had the entire Shas. And now you could get a resource with Gemaras that explain every Rashi in Shas, every line in Tosfos in Shas. Why, says Reb Schwab? Why is more Torah available today than it was 10, 20 years ago? He says, because Ribono Shel Olam loves you more than he did 20 years ago. That's why there are more yeshivas today, and more mefarshim today, and more svarim today. Because Ribono Shel Olam's love for us is not static, it grows greater and greater and greater. And I was shocked by this. I never heard this before. I never realized this before. And I've really been thinking about this. And I remember I once saw something Reb Chaim Vital writes, something his Rebbe taught him. You know who the Rebbe of Reb Chaim Vital was? The Arizal. The Arizal would say to Reb Chaim Vital, if he didn't say it, who could believe such a thing? He says you should know that in Shamayim, they hold you in higher esteem than Gedolim of the earlier generations. That's what the Ari told Maharchu, Reb Chaim Vital. So Reb Chaim Vital challenged the Arizal. Reb Chaim Vital didn't just accept that. He said, what are you talking about, Rebbe? You told me that I'm not even as great as the lowest of the earlier generations. And now you're telling me I'm greater than the tzaddikim of the earlier generations? Says the Ari, you're making a big mistake. You think the Ribono Shel Olam looks at you objectively. Hashem judges you based on the times you live in. And in our time, says Reb Chaim Vital, says Ari, the koyach hatuma is so out of control that the mitzvahs you do are more valuable today than they were in the times of the earliest generations. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of koyach hatuma was out of control in Tzfas in the 16th century? Imagine, if we would go to Tzfas 500 years ago, we would think that Mea Sha'arim is modern compared to Tzfas 500 years ago. And yet the Ari said, because the koyach hatuma is so strong and dominant, your mitzvahs are more valuable today than earlier generations. And I'm looking at this. I said, I don't know. It's the Arizal. We don't necessarily understand everything he says and everything he writes. Somebody showed me Rabbi Rucham Levavitz. Rabbi Rucham in Parsha Shlach in the Sefer Das Torah writes, I'll tell you, you could look it up yourself. You could have a Ben Torah today, a Yeshiva Bachar today. He's learning a Rishon. He's learning a Rashba. He's learning a Ritva. He's learning a Rambam. He's learning a Tosfos. And he's trying to understand the Rishon. And he's not really fully understanding it. Says Rabbi Yerucham, I don't like to speak about this too often, and I don't like to say it too much. But you need to know that in Shamayim, it could be, or it's possible, or probably, the Yeshiva Bachar is held in higher esteem than the Rishon of whose words he's learning. That's what Yerucham writes, black and white. And then they reprinted Rabbi Yerucham, and they said, if you think it sounds far-fetched, We already know this. This is what the Arizal told Reb Chaim Vital. And then I remembered back a shmuz from Rav Henoch Leibowitz, Zeichas L'Vracha. Now, I didn't hear so many. I was in Yeshiva the last year the Rosh Yeshiva gave Shiurim. I think the year that I was in the Yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshiva gave shmuz less than a handful of times. There's a famous Tosfos. You remember? I'm sure you know this Tosfos. Tosfos in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara tells us that we blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah twice. Why? To confuse the Satan. So Tosfos says, what do you mean to confuse the Satan? Tosfos says, the first time we blow the shofar, the Satan hears the shofar, he says, what is that? Is it recess time? Is the period over? Is it an alarm clock? Does somebody's cell phone go off? Or is it Mashiach? He gets a little bit nervous. And then the second time, Tosfos brings from the Yerushalmi, the second time the shofar blows, the Satan says, Vada is Mashiach, I'm out of a job, and he runs away. And the Rosh Yeshiva asked, is the Satan such a fool that he thinks it's Mashiach? Did you think it was Mashiach? Come on, between me and you. Did you think it was Mashiach? I didn't think it was Mashiach. I should have. Because I know he didn't come last year. And he didn't come the year before. And he didn't come for my great-grandfather. And he didn't come for the Chassam Sofer and Rebbe Kiva Eger. And the Marsha. And Rashi and Tosfos. So it's going to come for me. It hasn't come for so long. So why is the Satan? I thought he was a pretty smart guy. I mean, he does a pretty good job with his responsibilities. And the Satan thought it was Mashiach. And I believe the Rosh Yeshiva said, no one more than the Satan recognizes how powerful he is, how strong he is, how big the challenge is. We don't even realize necessarily how challenging our nisyonos are. Only he knows how valuable we are in Shamayim. He knows how close Mashiach is. But in light of what we're learning, I think Tosfos is understood perhaps even in a more compelling way. In other words, in every generation, as the nisyonos grow, as the challenges grow, it is more likely for Mashiach to come, because do you realize how important you are in Shamayim? If the Arizal told Reb Chaim Vital that a small mitzvah in his time was more valuable than the earlier generations, imagine how valuable one limud of Torah is today. Imagine if a person, a yeshiva bacher today, a young bacher today in South Florida in 2023 says, you know what? With all the challenges and all the distractions, I'm going to apply myself to Hashem's Torah. You know what? How valuable that is? That could be more valuable than the greatest mitzvah in the earliest generation. And I want to share with you a very personal thought. If I were to ask you, now what's the biggest miracle that ever happened in the world? Biggest miracle that ever happened. You know, Yetzias Mitzrayim, Makas B'chayros, Kriyas Yamsuf. We're all familiar. You know what Rabbi Yaakov, you know, my grandfather, he was in all the death camps. He was in Auschwitz. He was in Radom. My grandfather was taken to a camp called Dachau. In Dachau, he was thrown into the gas chamber. He literally had a foot in the gas chamber. And at the last second, the SS officers took him, yanked him by his hair, and pulled him out and said, you're capable of work, get out of here. And I always think to myself, did Hashem only save my grandfather from the gas chamber? The Rebbeinu Shalom saved my father. The Rebbeinu Shalom saved me. He saved my children. It was an open miracle. My grandfather said it was an open miracle. You know what Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes? Rabbi Yaakov Emden, in his introduction to the Siddur, writes epic words. He said, Eich lo yevosh hakoyfer. How can a heretic not be utterly ashamed? Be'ayin mamadenu ba'olam, analyzing the state of the Jewish people in the world. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Achar kol ma she'avar oleinu, after everything we have undergone, Churban Bayis Rishon, the death toll was 1.1 million. Churban Bayis Sheni. You know, in the times of the Spanish Inquisition, 300,000 Jews baptized. It happened also in 1391. The The majority of our people by then were long gone. That's 800 years ago, 700 years ago. Then Chmielnicki pogroms, Crusades, Holocaust. Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes, when I study the eternity of the Jewish people, Gadla etzli yoiser mikol nisim sha'asa hakadosh baruch hu b'Mitzrayim. It's greater than any miracle God performed for the Jewish people in Egypt. Think about that. When they were going through the Red Sea, the sea split, and they were walking through, some Jews rebelled over there. That's what Chazal say. So he asked the Jew, why are you rebelling? He said, if only I would see a real miracle. We say today, God, it's very hard to have emunah. If you would show me a real miracle like Kriyas Yamsuf, then I would have emunah. Back then, they probably said, Rebbeinu Shalom, if you would show me a real miracle, like Jews learning Torah in 2023, then I would have a real emunah. But a few of them, Chazal say, rebelled a little, because they didn't see real nisim, like you're seeing. Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, Chai nafshi, I swear. By the way, Chassam Sofer says about Rabbi Yaakov Emden, he's a Navi. He says those words. He says, I swear, by analyzing the eternity of the Jewish people, Gadla etzli yoiser mikol nisim sha'asa hakadosh baruch hu b'Mitzrayim. So let's think about that. The greatest miracle that ever happened in the history of the world. Who saw it? Who's seeing it? Nevi'im? Nah, they didn't really see it. Rishonim? Achronim? You're seeing it. Hashem selected you to see it. Why me? Ahava Rabba Ahavtanu. Because as much as Hashem loves Klal Yisrael, He loves us more in every generation. And as the years pass on, and we're still faithful to Hashem, and we're still faithful to the Torah, the Rebbeinu Shalom's love for us is greater and greater and greater. So if you're lying in bed in the morning and say, I have to go to shul, do you understand that if you could daven today, your tefillos, in a sense, are more dear and powerful than any Jew in the history of the world? Your learning Torah is more dear and powerful than any Jew in the history of the world. Because Hashem loves you more. One added point. There's a mitzvah in the Torah. We don't really even think about it that much. There's a mitzvah to love Hashem. Chavetz Chaim even writes in the Mishnah Berurah that the same way, you don't eat in the morning until you put on, you daven, you put on tefillin. You can't even eat in the morning until you're mekayim the mitzvah of loving Hashem. He says you should try to do it when you say the words V'ahavta es Hashem lekecha, and if you can't do it then, make sure you don't go home in the morning until you did that mitzvah. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger asks the question, how does a person come to love Hashem? So he says that's why if you look in the way the words of Shema are formulated, first we say, Haboicher bi'amo Yisrael bi'ahava, that the Rebbeinu Shalom loves Klal Yisrael. And then once you feel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves you, so there's a phenomenon in human nature. If somebody loves you, you love them back. So it's natural. So once we understand Hashem loves us, so we respond in kind. V'ahavta es Hashem lekecha. That's Rabbi Akiva Eiger. It comes out, which generation in history could love Hashem more than any generation? It's us. Because Hashem loves us more than any generation in history. And we are privileged to have more love from Hashem than anybody else. And therefore we are actually eligible to return in kind and to have stronger feelings of Ahavat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this really heightens an awareness of how important we are in Hashem's eyes, how much we're loved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how valuable every act that we do is, and therefore how we have been entrusted to get Klal Yisrael to the finish line. We're almost there. We're nearly at the end. You know who knows how close we are? Nobody more than the Satan knows how close we are. So a few things we got to learn from the Satan and take advantage of the wondrous opportunity Hashem gave us And I want to wish everybody bracha v'atzlacha in all of your endeavors. Thank you very much for having me, and bracha v'atzlacha. Kol tov.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.